Shibun Veni to this week's episode of Being Human. I'm here with Gabriel Jurj. He's right now in Romania, and that was my attempt at some Romanian at the start of the show there. Gabriel, welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be part of your podcast.
Yes, thank you. So the reason, so a bit of backstory, we've worked together a little bit in the past. You also contributed a chapter to the Cynefin at 21 book, which was relatively recently released. And for those who are unfamiliar with that, Cynefin is a framework for thinking about complexity, written and originated, co-originated by Dave Snowden, who both of us also know. So that's been a big theme on the podcast and a big interest of mine, that how we think about complexity and how we apply it, especially in business life. But I also know from your backstory, what an interesting path you've taken to the corporate role that you're now in. And so I wonder if we start with a bit of your backstory and your sort of journeys into self-inquiry, we might say, before we hit the complexity theme.
Yeah, sure, Richard. Yeah, we'll gladly do so. Okay, so starting maybe a bit prior to the university, I've always been passionate about technology, but then also about our nature as humans, individuals. Yeah, since high school, one of our famous writers, Mircea Eliade, which was a founder of a new field back then, the history of religion. I think he had set the ground worldwide into this, had been living the last part of his life in the US, in Chicago, being an academic, and teaching there at the university. But this was one of his main topics. Symbolism, religion, what is the human nature? Why are we here? So being heavily influenced by him since high school, reading a lot of his books, I was always interested into that part of spirituality. So beyond the self-discovery journey that I think we all take at some point, when I joined university, I found in Timișoara back then, which is in the western side of Romania, an organization that was teaching yoga systematically, right? So I joined the organization, and long story short, 2 years into it, I decided, I want to be a monk in this organization. And it's not the classical monk thing that you usually learn about from books or documentaries. It's not about retiring from society, go somewhere, meditate or pray all day or whatever. The monks in the organization had a pretty active role in the society and actually had to combine couple of things among the spiritual practice and helping others discover their own journey. You were also supposed to be able to manage business, that will produce the income for the social endeavors of the organization. In Romania back then, they were supporting a couple of kindergartens, which for abandoned kids or kids that were coming from poor backgrounds, and within the kindergarten curricula, they also were supposed to give those kids skills from early age, so they become independent adults, and that was done with volunteers, but monks were always supposed to be able to fund such endeavors without depending entirely on donations or external, let's say, means of supporting it. So here I was 2 years into the university, dropping out of the university for 2 years, going on this quest. Being young at that time, you don't think much of that impact that you have on people around you, and have been terrible for my mother for a while. She got used to the idea that, what is this guy doing?
Were your parents religious? Was like that?
Well, my mother, but I think she was also quite open-minded. Even it was a spiritual practice that wasn't part of the main Orthodox religion, which is the dominating one in Romania. Christian Orthodox part. She was okay with it. What she didn't like was the fact that I was dropping out of school for this particular reason.
Can you not just do your meditation in the morning, Gabriel,
can you
stay
just
at university?
do it and stay in school, right? So I went on this journey, working alongside to fund the training, and a couple of misfortunes, or at least the way I've seen them back then, happened. So I couldn't complete my training in the 2 years time that I could take from the university without losing entirely what I did. So at the end of that 2 years, I had some thought processing going on. What would I do? Do I stay another year or two, and then if I want to finish my study, I have to start it all from zero? So long story short, I said that back then, I owe this to my mother at least, so that she's happy and relaxed. Went back, finished my studies, and actually, in the end, decided to join the business world, which I see even today as an important vehicle to help society evolve and transform. If it goes beyond just the means of profit and satisfying the shareholders, right? So, I graduated. There were also some philosophical aspects in my thought process, that were important as well, and in that decision. But I went back, I finished my studies, and then a couple of years later, I joined the workforce, right? Individual contributor first in the area of IT, both in the part of the infrastructure and the software development world. But having also this, as I said, this passion for people, I was interested into the management career path. So I think it was my 4th year of work when I joined the first role that supposed or contained a part of coordinating and managing people. And from there onwards, I've been into various roles. And lately, I think in the past 10 years, I would say, leading organizations of various sizes, mainly active in the IT area. I spend a bit of time in consultancy and a bit of time in market research. And that's where I am today. Always remembering the practices since back then, which are really helpful in your day-to-day of a corporate citizen.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm fascinated with. We'll definitely come on to what you're learning as a manager and leader now. But like, what did your day look like then? So because I can remember what my day looked like at like that age, and it was crawling out of bed hungover, trying to make it to a few lectures, before the boozing started again at 7 in the evening. I mean, sounds to me like you had a very different existence as a monk. Like, how would your day go?
Back then, when I was into it, out of the university would be a lot of meditation and the asanas, and then working with the kids.
Which are poses, right? For those not familiar with yoga, that's like the yoga
physical
poses.
Postures in which you have to sit and help as well in your practice, strengthening the body and helping you concentrate as well. I think that's the simplest form of putting it. Working then as well with the kids, helping with the businesses that the monks that were teaching me back then had, so there could be funding as well for the social endeavors. Those were the days. Waking up very early, which I think comes naturally. I mean, I'm just looking back. I was always an early riser, and even for other friends that I had back then following the same practice, after a couple of months, it sort of grows into you naturally. This is not a forced thing. That you naturally wake up and start your day with a meditation session. Then you go along with various things that are more mundane, let's call it. And then you have another round at noon and another round in the evening, but then you fill in time with various other types of activities. And for me back then was as well, as I said, working with those disadvantaged kids. in the kindergartens that the organization had. And I also spent within those 2 years some time with the same organization in Istanbul and in Budapest, where they had various kinds of businesses that were run. Actually, if I'm to be correct, that was my first management job in Budapest. Actually, the monk that I stayed with in Budapest had a network of hostels in Budapest, and in my second month there, he just let me manage the whole thing. so he could properly focus on just the spiritual aspects and the social aspects of the organization.
And these were hostels for backpackers, were they? Is that?
Yes, they were hostels for backpackers. Yeah, it was interesting.
So you were trying to keep tourists happy all day whilst in between meditating.
Yeah, indeed. But that was an interesting journey, I think, and an interesting exposure as well to various cultures and various ways of thinking and looking at the world. I think I met quite a bunch of interesting people in that year in Budapest. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So that was then, and then when I came back to the university, I think that was a bit weirder as well from the standard, because as I said, the 2 years before that is the typical university where you have things to do. You struggle waking up in the morning because you were partying late the night before. So when I came back still embedded into this practice, I would be the odd guy in the room, that wakes up at 4:30 a.m. and does his weird stuff, and goes to bed as well quite early. But I enjoyed it, and I had colleagues in the room. My roommates were okay with it. At least they tolerated my weirdness. Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm imagining you must have had quite a strong character, and maybe this is just be projecting, but I kind of, were you not under some peer pressure to be like, oh, come on, Gabriel, loosen up, have a drink, don't be so boring.
There was, but again, back then I was quite strict. I sort of moderated into that years after, but at that time I was really, really strict, not having any alcohol or coffee or any sort of like nervous system stimulants, which is is the day-to-day of the student life. But it went okay for that period.
Right.
It requires some character indeed.
Yeah, I can imagine. And presumably helped with your studies, right? I mean, you being that sort of present and.
Yeah, well, probably, yes. The thing is, I was always longing sort of like, again, to this engineering thing. Yeah, so I think it helped with the studying, but those 3 years I had to complete after, were I sort of lived in two worlds at the same time, One, the school-related one, and the other one, my spiritual quest back then. And I think that was the main challenge, because, study-wise, if you pull your weight one way or the other, you go through it.
Yeah. And so, what did you see as your spiritual quest? That's interesting. Like, what did you have as your goal?
Well, I think the standard questions that we all ask ourselves probably at the moment we start to think and to rationalize and understand enough of the world around us. What's the purpose? What are we here for? That was my drive. Into that spiritual practice, and it's a continuous journey. Well, I think, but where it ended up with me back then, it's that I think as a society we have to evolve. There is a constant evolution happening naturally, and you can accelerate some of that at the individual level if you have a certain practice, either that being yoga or being Christian spirituality, praying. I don't know. I mean, there are a bunch of roads. As if you read a bit from all religions and all spiritual practices, I think you conclude by yourself pretty soon that there are a bunch of roads to the same destination of self-discovery. And I think that's where you can accelerate that journey. Yeah, and by accelerating your individual journey, then you can maybe inspire others around you and, contribute a bit to the society becoming better and better. Yeah?
Right. And so what do you see as self-discovery? Like, how do you relate to that idea?
Yeah, well, I think with those practice, your conscious awareness of what's happening with yourself, what's happening around you in the world expands. And then along the way, everybody so at least discovers a direction of travel. And this is the interesting thing, how connected those things are with the complex adaptive systems and the Canadian decision-making framework. Yeah, because it's, again, you never know your destination, or maybe you aim for a goal, like I want to understand the world, I want to understand myself, but it is not like I want to build a mobile phone. It doesn't have that level of concreteness. It's quite vague, right? So you actually, through the practice, I think you discover this direction of travel, and by exploration, and continuously iterating on that, it's sort of the path takes you somewhere, and sometimes left, sometimes right, sometimes straightforward. It's not a linear exploration. Yeah, this is what I found fascinating after I discovered Dave and his work, and we did a couple of things together using Canadian as a framework and the complexity science behind it. How connected some of those things are, and I know Dave particularly has a very strong belief, and it's not that much into the individual and the role of the individual. But I see a lot of those connections between this journey of self-discovery, which is an individual, you can call it egoistic up to some point, endeavor, and how complex adaptive systems work and how you should manage in a complex system. Right.
Well, let's see if we can draw out some of those connections then. So, I mean, you're saying that, and I'm sort of paraphrasing here, but I see it relate to it as some kind of surrender, right? You're just like, okay, I'm just going to keep on this path of self-discovery, and I'm going to allow myself to, go, as you said, go left and right, follow my nose at some level into, what's the next layer to unpeel? Like, what's the next, what's the next move for me on this path? And that relates somehow to complex adaptive systems. I wonder if you could draw that out.
Yeah. So the way I draw it out for myself is like when you start looking at a complex adaptive system, you try to discover what's going on in the present, right? And what is the evolutionary potential of the present, of the system, of the organization that you work with. You have to meet the system where it is, And it's the same, I think, with the spiritual practice, Presence, it's an important vector in I think all of the serious spiritual practices that I either did or been exposed to by reading and by talking with other people, that is also one of the fundamental things, to be present so that your inner voice gets the right medium to express, so the inner pilot or whatever we want to call it. I think that kicks in after a while of consistent practice, and it starts to guide you, that inner voice, and however you want to call it, your soul, your consciousness, your whatever. I think it is not that important how you call it, but that comes. And then it's the same with the complex adaptive systems. Once you build that initial map, of the system, and you see it, that dispositional map, you start to do experiments, right? And probe what works, what doesn't work, identify a direction of travel, and what works you scale, what doesn't work you you stop doing. And I think it's the same in this individual practice of whatever sort. Yeah, there's no predefined recipe that you just follow blindly and will take you somewhere. It's a consciousness effort, but at the same time, yes, it's all very, very connected with the present moment, the present status of the system, and what's the next iteration? Where is the next iteration taking me? And every iteration actually, changes you, changes the system, and there is this continuous need as well to probe and revalidate your hypothesis, deconstruct the system to a more granular level. Yeah, I think that is happening in the individual journeys as well of those that are practicing anything related to self-discovery. Yeah? Either you involve or not the spiritual aspect into it. I think that's also another dimension which is not mutually exclusive. Yeah, you can be on a journey, and you are a complex adaptive system by definition, right? We as humans are complex adaptive systems by definition.
Right. Yeah. And the metaphor here for me that's emerging is like, so we've got this idea of the quiet voice or the soul, or the God's whisper, or whatever how we ever want to relate to it. And somehow we're defining something like that in the system as a whole, right? You talk about the dispositional state, or so mapping out, and when the terrain, and what we mean by that, specifically with regards to the work that Dave Snowden does, is this idea of a narrative map, right? That with that's been plotted against different vectors, and we get to see some kind of landscape of where people are at within an organization. And it's almost like that is the voice, that's the quiet voice, the voice that's not readily espoused, right? But is there. Yeah. And then it's a question of what we do with that voice, right? Do we, as you say, how do we experiment? How do we iterate? Like, given that, what's next? Yeah.
And I think at the individual practice level, right, you always have some things that are helping you. There are some best practices or good practices as well, like we have in the clear or complicated space of the conniving, right? And then in the complex one, there are rules of thumb as well, that you apply, and then based off that you realize certain things in practice, as you do in an organization when you try to evolve it as a complex system. Yeah?
Right. And I suppose perhaps there's a parallel there between spiritual practices we might undertake and practices that I might apply in an organizational context. Is that right? Yeah, we were talking about, like, we've got these practices that we use with ourselves, being complex adaptive systems, and that we can apply certain practices out there with organizations and complex adaptive systems. So I think there are so many parallels between the work we can do on ourselves and the work we do with organizations across the individual and the collective, as you say, that Dave Snowden seems to reject because he talks about it doesn't scale. But then all spiritual self-work is done on an individual level ultimately. And yet, are we saying that spirituality doesn't scale, or like religious practice doesn't scale? I think it's absurd to make that claim that, we can't have a mass effect or through using the vector of individuals. I don't understand that.
Yeah, I think there are many, many pieces in this puzzle, and I don't have all of them. So it's this continuous journey, and probably the picture just completes itself at some point. But right now, for me, I see all of those things as the way I spoke about them, and who knows what's the next step? As the POV says, it's a continuous iteration and a continuous practice, and there's no end goal in a classical way. It's a direction of travel that you always look for. in a complex adaptive system.
Yeah. And this is, and you really lived these principles, because I can remember you and I, we set up, a large scale workshop together at your organization in Romania. I must say in Brasov, which for anybody who ever gets the opportunity to go to Romania, go to Brasov. It's the most, beautiful, well, it's a beautiful city, or at least the old parts of it are, and a beautiful setting. But we did this workshop, and I was like, well, okay, we need to have some kind of goal for the workshop, right? We need to have some kind of direction. We got to be doing this. And the workshop was about understanding, what are the present opportunities to, improve the culture of your organization or improve how your effectiveness. And you were just like, no, let's not put any. let's just be with what's possible right now. Like, you were completely open to the idea that there's no container beyond like what's possible. And, I just felt that was very bold in a sense, in a corporate settings, because, so often we're all constrained, aren't we, by very often very specific goals about what the organization, or at least the leaders of an organization, want to achieve at that particular moment in time.
Yeah, and we were constrained back then as well, right? I mean, I think from my larger team that I'm a member of, I had this pressure and the constraints that, what is it exactly? What comes out of this? What is the tangible thing that we can all look at and measure and evaluate? But I think luckily I realized early that it's no point of running it with that approach in mind. It misses the whole purpose of the approach, right? If you constrain it too much, then there are very few things that could emerge out of a very constrained system. Yeah,
you're right. Yeah, and again, back to the sort of individual parallel, we can't, we can't on the one hand pursue spiritual growth and on the other be really fixed to goals that are held onto and clasped by the ego, right? Those things can't exist at the same time. Part of the growth is to let go of what the ego wants, and to detach from that. And that's so hard, I think, for organizations to get their head around, this idea that, a certain level of letting go of what our plan might be, our strategy might be, is the route to maximizing the potential of the organization in the present. That would seem, entirely contradictory in the kind of worldview that says, no, to maximize our potential, we've got to have clear goals. We've got to know where we go. We've got to have a plan.
Yeah, I think you're right. And the funny thing is that I think all organizations, even when they have those plans, it rarely, if ever, goes as planned. But then nobody does the retrospective afterwards, and even with the risk of the retrospective coherence that we learn about in complexity, nobody does that properly to realize that actually, the journey was pretty different from what we aim for, and some are still stubborn to go to that concrete goal, even if they miss other things along the road. But I think slowly, and it's an important, I would say, dynamic right now with the virus, with the coronavirus, which had put a lot of the organizations in a paradox, right? That work from home was something sort of like a dream. In the standard corporate world, you will always have 1 up, maybe 2 days per week, not more than that. Everybody being afraid in the senior management that this will not work, right? And all of a sudden, from one day to the other, it actually worked. Okay, there are many things to be told about it. What are the consequences of a long or very extended period of work from home? But that I think sort of brought a new normal. I don't know if we can properly call it an executive situation as we have it in the theory, but I think it drastically changes the corporate world, and that change had just begun. Right.
Yeah. I think we should we've just thrown out a couple of bits of jargon there, which might be useful just to explore for people. So we talked about whether something's exaptive, and we could talk about that, and retrospective coherence. So I wonder if you could start with the second one first. What do you mean by retrospective coherence?
Yeah, so when you look backwards at something, right, it makes sense, and you find connections where actually when it happens, they aren't there. Yeah, you see the linearity when you look backward at a situation, while actually when you are within that situation, it's not a linear system. Yeah, that's the retrospective coherence, and that's why. As Dave is also saying on multiple occasions, again, in the corporate world, sometimes you do an analysis at the end of a project, but that rarely reaches its purpose, its goal, because of this retrospective coherence. Things make sense after they happen, but that doesn't necessarily explain why they happen in a certain way. Yeah.
Right, because our brain wants to be able to make some linear sense of things and organize it in our mind. Oh, this and then that happened and this happened and that's why this happened. That's how we're wired.
Why this whole case study based literature that we are all exposed to, it's quite often pure nonsense, because they take a few cases of what worked, what didn't work, and draw a conclusion from there that, okay, there is a recipe to be followed and everybody is jumping into this. And let's follow the recipe, being convinced that they will get the same result, while actually that doesn't happen. Yeah, you can have 10 companies all doing the same, and 1 or 2 will be successful. The other 8 will go bankrupt just by doing the same things. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, we see that in business books all the time, right? Yeah, they'll pick like 10 or 12 case studies that match the pattern. They'll claim that because these businesses are doing X, Y, Z, that's why they're great. Yeah, as you say, miss all the ones that have failed doing exactly that. And then there's never the retrospective, like 10 years later, to see whether those companies are still successful. Yeah. Well, with the exception of good to great, I think that one got that somebody did some analysis, didn't they, on those good to great companies and discovered that many of them weren't so great after all in the long run.
Yeah, that's a famous example of the retrospective coherence. Yeah, and confusing actually correlation with causation. Yeah, which is another quite common symptom in the world, not only in the corporate world.
Yeah. And then the second term you used was exaptive, which is familiar in the complexity domain. We're familiar with that, but just explain for people what we mean by that. Yeah. So I hope I'm able to explain it properly. The simple way I look at it is that something develops for a purpose, but then along the way it changes and it starts to be used for a completely different purpose, and that's an adaptation. Yeah. I think they've always used this example of the dinosaurs, that evolved feathers for the purpose of warmth and sexual displays, and some species were living in the trees, right? And obviously accidents happens as well, and you fall from trees every now and then. Yeah, so I don't know how many of those dinosaurs fell from the trees, and some of them discovered along the way that they could fly by extending their wings, and then that evolved into flight, right? So that's an exaptive example. Right. Yeah, and then you were questioning whether our current work from home might be some kind of exaptive evolution. I suppose maybe in one sense, right? We evolved this way of working as a means for some people to like have a day at home to catch up on stuff or deal with family commitments, and it's become an entire way of life. Maybe you can make the argument.
I think there's some potential in there. I'm not necessarily saying that it exapted into something, but it's a journey that is irreversible right now, triggered by the pandemic, which will bring a lot of change, I think, in the corporate world and in the society as well. And because a lot of people are already into this, all right, this scenario fits me best. I still want to get back with my colleagues and see them, but not on a day-to-day basis. And then that opens up many other things. A better work-life balance, not sitting in traffic the whole day. You can
the opportunity to go learn to fly airplanes.
Yeah, that too.
So for those listening, you've just got your pilot's license, right? That's been the lockdown dividend, ironically enough.
Yeah, and it's been a long dream from childhood. Yeah, so the pandemic helped me get that as well. And
I think just the language we're using, right, like the new normal, or are we going back to the old normal? But that, we sort of crave normalcy, don't we, as humans? Like we rather than sort of a different stance, which like what's possible now? Like what's possible now? What's possible now? No, I don't want to answer that question. I just want to keep it the same. Yeah. But
I think that's also part of the education, right? And the education system, which has to evolve, in my opinion, as well. And get people more familiar with the complexity part, because actually that's what life is, right? I mean, okay, practicing whatever or not practicing anything, if you build a habit at least to reflect every now and then on your life and your experiences along the years, right? You see the perfect example of a complex adaptive system evolving and moving through various stages, changing continuously, right? Yes, okay, there are not revolutions there every day, but there is a constant change of that system as individuals. It never stays the same, even though we are longing for the stability and normality and repeatable things. At the same time, we get bored by them, right?
Yeah. Right. Yeah, that's true. And I see it with kids, right? With my kids, I'll sort of float along, I'll be very calm and very zen. Or I've got twin boys, and I'm just dealing with them and then suddenly out of nowhere, I'll snap at one of them, and it's like, wow, like where did that come from, Richard? And it's through like journaling and self-reflection. That's the way for me to understand how this system that seems so, in this state of equilibrium suddenly sort of leapt into some kind of chaos, right? Which is what we talk about in complex systems, how that happens.
Yeah. It's hard, I think, to get trained to do that shallow dive, how Dave calls it, into chaos, which is a conscious effort of going into chaos, removing constraints from the system, get there into chaos, which is the breathing space of innovation. It's very, very hard to train yourself or others to do those type of things consciously. And with kids, they are the master of chaos.
Yeah, you get it for free, right? Like it's been an absolute boon to my spiritual growth, or at least that's what I have to tell myself every day. Because I'm constantly frequently being thrown into these chaotic situations, and sort of my own chaotic internal state. Like I'll become disoriented and erratic, as a result of these stimuli. And it's the work is to it's like relax and how can I release that and relax and reflect and constantly. It's the work.
I think we have to discover at some point the best way to be able to keep that thread that we have. We all have it as a kid, and we see it in our own kids. That constant exploration in the present, which they do, up to a certain age, and then when we start to enroll them in school, and then a lot of things that we do in school make sense, but all that process of schooling them, at some point, it sort of loses that childhood play, right, and that explorative mind that is able to stay there in an environment connected with what's going on around and just explore the potential of that situation.
Yeah, I mean, and it's extraordinary. And I watched like one of my boys, and they'll pick up a stick. I was like, oh, this could be a drumstick. Oh, and now it could be like a pretend cigarette, and now it could be, I don't know, like a tong for cooking. And in the space of like, 10 or 20 seconds, they'll have come up with 6 or 7 different uses for like one object, and it's just extraordinary, isn't it? That level of creativity and curiosity for potential that exists in us when we're that young.
Which is just naturally there. Then I think, yes, as we grow up, we have to relearn that skill. And I think that's one of actually the important missing skills today in organization. That appetite for experimentation, rediscovery, repurposing of things, using the tools that you have at hand to constantly evolve. There, as you were mentioning as well, we seem to be pushing more into we just want it the same old, nothing to change, and we don't look at the system, or rarely look at the system in its entirety and explore it, probe it to see how to evolve to a next stage.
Yeah, and it's well, I like as well to think of it as the beginner's mind, right? Like, let's just let go of our experience, our ego, our perspectives, as much as it's possible for us to do. I mean, that in itself, of course, is a lifetime of practice, but to just be with, right? Be present. What's there? What's possible? And I remember when I first learning about the Toyota production system and that the understanding of Kaizen and this way of working to improve systems there. Like, one of the rules is you're not allowed to use extra resources, right? You've got to make adaptations to your, in this case, production line, your tooling or whatever it may be. You mustn't spend money. You've just got to use what you've got, your resources available to you right now. And that, I think, can be a really important constraint, an important idea. Like, so often when we think about innovation in companies, it's all about like, what can we, it can be at the level of what company can we acquire, or what can we go out and buy. We seem to have less of a focus in organizational life on like, no, just what can we do like right now with what we've got.
Yeah, I think there's the other human tendency of I want it all and I want it now. Yeah, not having that patience to grow towards that, evolve towards that, and discover it. Yeah, and it takes time, as much as we like it or not. Yeah. It doesn't instantly happen, or maybe that happens very, very rarely. But the usual way things go, right, require times and patience.
Yeah, and I find myself, having to fight against it because it's so even. Just in my general life, like if I need something, in my house, I need to fix it, or I need some to change something in some way. My instant instinct is just to go to Amazon. Like, what can I buy to solve this problem? It's not like, what could I make to solve this problem, or what that I already own could I adapt to solve this problem? It's becoming so easy for us, isn't it, just to buy our way out of problems?
Yeah, very easy in today's world. It seems to be more and more easier, actually. Without us realizing that maybe we also lose something along the way.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's that's an important. I don't know, like an important. You want to say skill? Well, it is a skill, I suppose. It's a thinking skill, isn't it? It's a set of problem-solving skills, you might say.
Yeah, and I know just listening to you, right? I just remember when Romania was not a democracy, when we were under communism, everything was scarce. Yeah, there was a scarcity on food, there was scarcity on tools, there was scarcity on materials, and as a kid you don't feel those things the same way like a grown-up feels it. Yeah, but I'm quite sure that contributed a lot, at least into my generation and the generations that were younger than me, that grew up in those years, to sort of be more comfortable with not having everything at hand, but still make out something out of whatever you have. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So Yeah, I think that capacity, in a system, again, we keep going and revolving around complexity. Yeah. If you don't have scarcity, it's worse than when some things are scarce. Yeah.
Yeah.
That breeds complacency, that sort of breeds those automated responses to everything, because there's everything it's at a click distance, yeah, and you can solve a lot of problems either with Amazon or with calling an expert or whatever. The technology gives you access to a wide set of tools and expertise. But then at the same time, if it's not scarce, you are not challenged.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
You become complacent, and you sort of like when something then comes and that it's only about what can I do to fix it with what is around you. It's very, very hard, to be in that state.
Yeah, no, and I see it in my own family with my father. I mean, my dad grew up, sort of lower middle class, not a lot of money around, and is very adept at making all kinds of things. And whenever I have or very often when I have a problem at home, it'll be like, "Hey, Dad, can you come fix this?" Because he's got all of these skills I never developed. Now, there are other aspects that, he got education, he went to technical college and stuff. So he does have a sort of layer of education on top, but his basic, just abilities that I don't have, and I don't see it, in my brother or other people of my age. We just don't have that ability to go fix the car like our father's generation did. And, I fear that my kids are going to be even more inept.
Yeah, and you're right. That's one of my fears as well with our daughter. Yeah, because as parents, we also grew up in an environment that wasn't abundant, not both at the society level because of the communists, but also our parents couldn't afford everything. Yeah, and now because the society evolved, you have good jobs and you can afford more than your parents could afford as a generation. We sort of try to satisfy all the requests that are coming from our kids, but then at the same time, yes, you have this constant thought process saying, okay, am I doing a good thing or a bad thing? Actually, not exposing my kid to anything. Yeah, there's nothing scarce in their world, or almost nothing. Yeah, there's full abundance of everything. And yes, I think that damages something in their evolution towards the adult life. Yeah.
Yeah.
Where for sure they will not have everything. Yeah. It's not a criticism to the younger generations, but I think you can see it in interactions with younger colleagues or with younger acquaintances and friends. You can see that there is this sort of, I want it now, it needs to happen now. Why wouldn't it happen now? Yeah. There's less patience than probably we had when we grew up. Yeah.
No, I think that's right. But I also think it's interesting as well that you see the counter movement, right? You see, as the system as a whole, right? Like yoga's become so popular. I mean, my kids are doing like yoga at like
it's cool.
Kindergarten, right? It's like at the same time our life is speeding up. We're pulling on these resources to help us slow down, right?
Yeah, well, there's always this circular movement. Yeah, how is that saying? What goes around comes around. I'm not sure if that's the proper one, but this cyclic or cyclicity in society, and certain things come and go, they come again, and I think it's good that kids are doing those things in kindergarten and in school. Maybe sometimes it's a mechanicistic approach, but still, it gives them something, right, to be better prepared to live a fulfilling life.
Yeah, at least it takes the kind of weird, at the very least, it takes the weirdness out of it. I mean, I think, because I can remember when I first started kind of getting yoga and into spirituality, it's there's a kind of weird factor to it, which obviously you were able to deal with, manfully in your early 20s, or among your peers, but it's there. I mean, I remember there's a dating show in the UK, and the way it works is the women get to pick the men, right? So there's whatever, like 15 men, and they're all on podiums, and they get to say a little bit about themselves. And each round, like, these men get successively knocked out, right?
Right.
But actually, so hang on, I've got the setup wrong. So there's one man, and all the girls have lights, but they extinguish their light when they're no longer interested in the guy, right? And the guy has to do various exercises until, eventually, hopefully there's at least like one light left, and then they get to go on a date. But this one guy, like in his opening spiel, says, "Yeah, no, I'll do this, I do that. Oh, and I'm into meditation and yoga." And it was just like 90% of all these girls' lights just went off. And it's just this like, weirdo alert.
Yeah.
So I think nothing else. But yes, it takes the weirdness out of having a spiritual.
That's interesting. Yeah. Well, aspect. When I started, at least, I think it also had a bit of a cool factor in it, not being a very spread thing back then in Romania. I remember my colleagues and former colleagues, as I dropped for 2 years, that they always were like, "Oh, wow, that's interesting."
Right. So more cool and square. That's good. Yeah. Maybe it'll get cool again. Maybe it is getting cool. I mean, to some extent it is, I suppose, with, more celebrities doing yoga, and meditation seems to be having a mindfulness. It seems to be becoming a little bit more.
I think the other thing, which is really valid in both the individual practice and in the complex adaptive systems and how you manage in a complex adaptive system, that journaling, that Dave has, omnipresent in the methods and the approaches, that's very powerful. I think, the more, and I think, that's one of the things that has to come up in, or has to be part of the day-to-day in schools and in kindergarten, Getting kids used to journaling from early age will help them tremendously their entire lives.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that's been like, as well as all the other modalities I've explored, it's like they've been like a free therapist. My journal is the way I see my journal, right? It's, I've learned so much through just writing the stuff down. And of course, it's a great resource to go back, and I can look at back my journal. I've got them all, going back years now.
Yeah, and that is, that is the biggest challenge. And even in our work together, right, and the work we did with Cognitive Edge, I think that was one of the major challenges in this endeavor and this journey. Getting people that are mainly engineers by formation to journal, to reflect on their deeds, right? I don't think it's restricted to engineers. I mean, I've done this with journalists, right, for a living, and getting them to journal. There's a big difference. There's a big difference between professional writing and journaling for, a self-reflection. And also Steve McCrone, who's worked a lot with Cognitive Edge, and is also featured in the book Connevin at 21, and is a complexity practitioner. He said the same problem, right? Is getting people to journal, which is coming all full circle for people not familiar with that dispositional state that we talked about. That almost that idea, that it's not quite, but the soul of the organization, or at least like what's emerging right now in the organization, is really built up through all of these effectively journal entries, right? Like little stories that people write about themselves. But if you don't have that, that's the currency, right? That's the fuel for this picture. And if people aren't prepared to just spend that little bit of time reflecting on their experience in the organization, you can't build that picture, right? Yeah. And that requires persistence and not letting go of it.
Right. Yeah. like being a good yogi, like just staying with it.
Yeah.
Wow. So I'm interested to know, like, of all of the practices and things, have you got any that you continue with today?
Yeah. On the meditative practice, I still have a couple of things that I continue with even today. Exercising wise, not that much, even though this sort of like growing back into me as well. You get carried away by various things in life, and this was for me one thing that I sort of, it's not a regret, but I miss it. Yeah,
and this is what do you mean, the physical asanas, the yoga, you mean? Or
yeah, because that, we are multi-layered beings, right? You have the physical level, you have the psychic level, and okay, if you believe or not that there is something of a spiritual nature, you also have then a spiritual nature, and then there are, in a practice like yoga, all of those things come to sort of support each of those layers. Your meditative practice takes care of the psychological dimension and the spiritual dimension. You believe in that is not a necessity in yoga to believe in anything, right? And then the asanas, the physical exercises, are taking care of the physical part as well. Strengthening your body. That definitely then has an impact in your on your mind. It helps strengthening your mind as well, and your entire personality. And that part I'm sort of like missing, and sort of I restarted some while ago to do some of those things as well. I'm not as consistent as I should be with them.
A few downward dogs to start the day.
Sorry?
A few downward dogs to start the day.
Yeah. And the funny thing is kids help here as well, because, as I said, they do it in school now or in kindergarten. And as kids, for them, it's cool. And they do all of those poses. And actually, my daughter had been helping into it, because she always comes with, I learned this. Can you do this? Can you do that? And okay, I'm not as flexible as I used to be. And sometimes it's challenging. But it's a fun thing to do with your child. Yeah.
Yeah, I've had that. Or doing plank pose with a couple of 4-year-olds on your back. That's it's good practice.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And then do you have like some practices like during the day? Obviously you're executive, you're exposed to all of the normal pressures of working in a big organizations. Is there any other techniques or anything you use, during your day-to-day?
Yeah, I think I use very often the simplest thing that I think everybody will learn at the beginning, the breathing and paying attention to your breathing. Yeah? That's the simplest thing that everybody could do. And yes, you are exposed to challenges in an organization, and sometimes to people that are in various moods, right? And I find that I would say on a almost day-to-day basis, very useful. Yeah, when something goes wrong in a conversation or in an interaction, just getting back on your breathing and just do this relaxed breathing and follow that. It helps you stay sane. Right.
Yeah, no, that's great. Good. Well, it feels like we've had a really good tour of both the kind of individual and the systemic when it comes to complexity.
Yeah, well, I would be curious to have Dave back in one of your shows and explore a bit this dimension of individual and scaled.
Yeah, no, I've sort of tried to touch into it a bit, and even the spiritual aspect, right? Because for me, there's this link between, a certain point, right? If we sort of say, well, we can't, we can't understand it all as humans, right? And like we can't predict the future. So to me, there is this link with the sort of spiritual angle, even in the sort of stance we take when we think about complexity, because it's like, well, okay, well then there's something else beyond, even if it's as simple as there's something beyond human understanding that exists in our material world. Maybe if that's all it is, right? To me, already there's like a parallel with some of the, the more sort of philosophical stances you might some say that come out of, religious perspectives. But yeah, that doesn't seem to be when I asked Dave about, his religion, because he's religious as I understand it, he's Roman Catholic, as has any of the work been informed by your beliefs? He's, didn't really want to go there. So, yeah.
Well, I'll try to.
Okay, well, we'll see.
Some of those questions really triggered the appetite for a follow-up on this.
Yeah. Good. Okay, so we mentioned the book Cynefin at 21. So we obviously, for people who've not heard about this, and we've sort of been banging on about it, there is this Cynefin framework. It's a great way to thinking about complexity, especially how it applies in organizations. There's a book called Cynefin at 21 years anniversary of the birth of this framework, which you can buy, and which Gabriel submitted us a chapter for. So we'll put a link to that book. Anything else you'd like to put a link to or draw people's attention to? Your own kind of is that order of monks still around? Can people still join it?
Yeah, that's still around. Well, as we started with complexity, and we did several dives into it. I found that complexity science something that is useful at both individual and organizational levels. I use it in my day-to-day life, as I use it in my day-to-day life as an employee, as a corporate citizen. And I will highly encourage everybody to get familiar with that. What is complexity? How do you manage in complexity? Because yes, it really serves both individual needs and organizational needs.
Yeah. Okay. So just go research complexity science. Yeah, that's a good direction.
And be open to explore. Yeah, I think that's something that I strongly believe in, and yeah, I've been through it my entire life, and I think complexity helped me better understand and frame it. Yeah, even though I was sort of maybe practicing a lot of the things intuitively in the past, but yeah, be open to explore. Yeah, that's the normal way, I think, of being human.
Yeah. Develop your openness. I like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it's tweaked my interest. So for people who are, especially in your part of the world, in Eastern Europe, that organization that you mentioned, that's still going. What was the what's it called?
The organization I was part of.
Yeah, with the monks.
Yeah, that is called Ananda Marga. It's an Ananda Marga.
Ananda Marga. Okay, there we are.
Yeah, that's an Indian. It's a classical, let's say, Indian school of yoga. Yeah, and yeah, it's still going. They are still active, not only in Romania, in the entire Eastern Europe, and they also, I think, still have activities in many Western countries now, where they have classes for those interested and still active on the social realm, with various activities.
Okay, Ananda Marga. Good. All right. Well, thank you so much. Mulțumesc.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you. I can't wait to get this out there.
Yeah, looking forward to watch the recording and see how coherent I was.
All right. Yeah, you were. And admirable you're doing it, of course, in the second language. It's great. Okay, well, thanks once again. La rivedere.
Thank you. Bye-bye. La rivedere.
Bye.